At the gala celebrating the 50th anniversary of the corporation, I was honored amid the applause of hundreds of guests. For the first time in my life, the name Julian Mercer was announced as a symbol of pride for the family. But just minutes later, my own relatives chased me away from the head table, as if determined to erase me from their perfect picture. I stood up quietly and began to leave, until Alfred Mercer, the man I still called grandfather, took the microphone and revealed a truth that silenced the entire room. And I, the grandson closest to him, stood frozen as he spoke about my true origins. Before I tell you what happened next, hit like and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Have you ever been ignored until you became successful? Hello, my name is Julian Mercer. You may have heard the name, or at least the Mercer surname, tied to articles praising one of Boston's most powerful financial dynasties, but I wasn't born into that dazzling spotlight. I was an adopted son, an errant inkblot on the Mercer family's flawless canvas. And my story begins in the days when I was merely a silent shadow in Weston Hills Manor, where every step was rehearsed and every word had to fit the script of perfection. I grew up in a small attic room at the top of Mercer Manor, a sprawling estate tucked between oak-lined streets and cold stone walls that hid every secret. My room was nothing like the lavish quarters of Vivienne, Conrad, or Isabella, my adoptive siblings. It barely held an old iron bed, a scarred wooden desk, and a tiny window overlooking the dark forest. In winter, icy air slipped through the cracks, and I would shiver beneath a thin blanket, listening to the wind howl through the trees. I often wondered what I had done wrong to live such a life. The Mercer family was a Boston icon, a financial empire graced with magazine covers, charity galas, and perfect smiles. My grandfather, Alfred Mercer, was the patriarch, stoic, commanding, his mere presence enough to silence a room. My adoptive father, Gregory Mercer, was his only son, cold and distant. My adoptive mother, Ruth, came from a prominent New England political family and carried herself with regal pride as if she ruled an invisible kingdom. Vivienne was sharp and calculating, Conrad arrogant and entitled, and Isabella, the youngest, was the only one who looked at me without contempt. I knew I was adopted from an early age, not because anyone told me, but because of how they treated me. At every dinner, I sat at the far end of the table, where the chandelier's light never reached. Their conversations about stocks, high society, and summers in Cape Cod floated past me like a breeze. No one asked about my grades, or even looked my way. I learned to eat slowly, quietly, pretending to be invisible. Once, when I spilled a glass of water, Ruth stood abruptly, her voice cutting through the silence like glass. "Is greater than, you'll never learn the manners of a Mercer, will you?" I bowed my head, wiping the spill, while the rest of the table fell silent, judging. Gregory didn't even glance my way. To him, I was just a duty to fulfill. Vivienne and Conrad found new ways to remind me I didn't belong. Only Isabella would sneak into my attic at night, clutching a small toy or a book she'd taken from her room. "Is greater than, I brought this for you," she'd whisper, eyes wide, afraid of being caught. I'd smile, pat her head, and murmur a thank you, though my throat always tightened. I kept those small gifts in a tin box under my bed, proof that somewhere in that cold house, a fragment of warmth still existed. But the one person who truly made me feel seen was grandfather Alfred. He lived on a ranch outside the city, where he kept his horses and spent his days away from the polished walls of the Mercer Empire. Every weekend, he'd summon me not to spoil me, but to teach me. "Is greater than Julian," he'd say in that deep, measured voice. "A man isn't defined by his name, but by what he does." He taught me to ride, to stand when I fell, and to think beyond the privileges others took for granted. In Mercer Manor, I learned silence. I learned to turn loneliness into fuel. I stayed up reading, studying, and dreaming of one thing, that one day they would have to respect me. But childhood dreams don't bloom easily in the shade of disdain. Each time I walked the halls, I heard Conrad's laughter, or Vivian's sneers. "The bastard boy," they'd whisper when they thought I couldn't hear. So I buried the pain deep. I focused on my studies. My grades rose higher than any of theirs. Even though I attended public school while they went to elite academies, I didn't complain. I told myself, one day, they'll see. And one winter morning, that chance came. That winter morning, when the letter arrived, I nearly dropped it from my trembling hands. It was embossed with the gold seal of Harvard Business School. I'd earned a full scholarship. No one congratulated me. Ruth barely looked up from her breakfast. "That's nice," she said, as though I'd told her I'd learned to tie my shoes. Conrad smirked. They must be lowering their standards. But Grandfather Alfred, he called that evening. His voice carried pride I had never heard before. "Is greater than, you earned it, Julian. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The world beyond Weston Hills will be harder, but it will also be fairer." For the first time, I believed him. Harvard was my escape. A city of sharp suits, sharper minds, and competition that cut like glass. But I thrived in it. I had no family name to protect, no safety net to fall back on. Every grade, every internship, every night spent under fluorescent light was a step closer to the man I swore I'd become. When my peers celebrated, I worked. When they slept, I planned. After graduation, I returned to Boston not to seek approval, but to build something of my own. But destiny has a cruel way of looping back. The first job I landed was at Mercer Holdings, the very empire that had once treated me like a stain on its crest. The HR manager smiled faintly when she saw my last name. "Is greater than, you must be, related to the Mercers?" I simply nodded. Something like that. Gregory barely reacted when he learned I'd joined the firm. Vivian made sure to remind everyone I'd been adopted out of pity. Conrad called me the family's charity project. But I didn't fight back, not with words. I fought back with numbers. My first year in the marketing division, I doubled regional revenue. My second, I spearheaded a campaign that went national. By my third year, I had the CEO of a New York partner firm shaking my hand, telling me, "Is greater than, you've got a head for strategy, Mercer. Keep climbing." That night, I stood before my bathroom mirror and felt a flicker of pride for the first time in my life. A year later, my outstanding performance earned me a promotion to Deputy Marketing Director. The announcement came during a company-wide meeting. When my name was called, a strange hush fell over the room. I could almost hear their thoughts. The adopted one? Really? But I stood, bowed slightly, and returned to my seat. No applause could matter more than that quiet fire inside me. My rise, however, lit a different kind of flame within the family. At a company party, Vivian leaned toward a cluster of employees and whispered, "Is greater than, he's just grandfather's puppet." Conrad, now Deputy Finance Director, began watching me with unease. The smugness in his eyes turned to something else, fear. And then came Gregory's summons. I entered his office. He sat behind his mahogany desk, his expression carved from stone. "Is greater than, you're climbing fast, Julian," he said, his tone smooth but cold. "But don't think you can outshine everyone." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My silence was my defiance. Every report, every campaign, every success, I built them like bricks in a fortress no one could tear down. I knew the path wasn't easy, but I'd promised myself I would turn every scornful stare into respect, not by begging, but by winning. At 30, I became head of marketing at Mercer Holdings. Under my leadership, the department shattered every sales record, transforming the company from a regional player into a global brand. Major publications from the Boston Globe to the Wall Street Journal called me a rising visionary in corporate strategy. Pride filled me, yes, but so did unease. Because the higher I climbed, the more their resentment burned. The Mercer Group was approaching its 50th anniversary, a monumental milestone marking half a century of dominance in global finance. To celebrate, they hosted a gala at the Beacon Grand Hotel, a ballroom drenched in gold and glass, where Boston's elite floated between champagne and ambition. I walked in wearing my first custom-tailored black suit, feeling as though I were stepping into an arena. Heads turned, not in mockery this time, but curiosity, admiration. Executives shook my hand, toasting my achievements. "Is greater than, you've done the impossible, Mercer," said a New York partner, raising his glass. I smiled, nodding politely, though I could feel my family's envy watching me from across the room. Gregory sat at the head table, his eyes cold. Ruth, draped in pearl silk, whispered to her circle of socialites, but kept glancing at me with irritation. Vivian, in crimson, smiled falsely. "Is greater than, you look decent in that suit, Julian, but the spotlight doesn't quite fit you." Conrad stood with younger shareholders, smirking as he muttered something that made them laugh. Only Isabella, quiet, gentle Isabella, offered me a genuine smile from her corner. Then the speeches began. Gregory spoke of legacy and family, of 50 years of success, but never once mentioned my name. I wasn't surprised. I was used to invisibility. I sat at a side table near the exit, sipping my wine, pretending to listen. But then the MC stood, holding a microphone. "Is greater than, tonight, we also honor one man whose innovative campaigns brought Mercer Holdings to new heights." A pause. "Is greater than Mr. Julian Mercer." Applause roared through the ballroom, waves crashing against crystal and pride. I rose slowly, heart pounding, and walked to the stage to accept the award. For a moment, the light of the chandelier bathed me in gold. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I truly belonged. But as I stepped down, the MC added something unexpected. "Is greater than, please, Mr. Mercer joined the family at the head table." I froze. The family table, the one that had always been off limits to me. I walked toward it, every step echoing in the silent ballroom. And then, Gregory's voice sliced through the air. "Is greater than, this table is for family, not an adopted stray." Conrad chuckled. Vivian smirked. Even Ruth's lips curved in disapproval. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, the entire room went still. A waiter froze mid-step. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. I could have walked away humiliated, but I didn't. I smiled faintly, nodded once, and returned to my table. Under the glow of chandeliers, I lifted my glass and whispered to myself, "Is greater than, they can't chase me from my own dreams." And across the ballroom, under the flicker of crystal light, I saw Grandfather Alfred's gaze steady, unwavering. He didn't speak, but his eyes said it all. "You did well, son. Keep going." The gala ended long after midnight, but I didn't stay to celebrate. I left early, the applause still echoing faintly in my head. Outside, Boston's winter air cut through my suit like knives. I loosened my tie, watching my breath fade into the night. I had everything I thought I wanted: power, respect, success, and yet a hollow ache pulsed inside me. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Grandfather Alfred. "Is greater than, come see me tomorrow morning. Urgent." No explanation, no details, just those 3 words. I barely slept that night. When I arrived at his townhouse the next morning, the snow had already started to fall, soft, steady, like ash on quiet streets. His assistant let me in, leading me to the study. The old man sat by the window, wrapped in a navy robe, the fire flickering beside him. His once commanding figure looked frail, but his eyes, those sharp, assessing eyes, still held their light. "Sit down, Julian," he said quietly. I did. He studied me for a long moment. Then he said, "Is greater than, you've made me proud. More proud than the rest of them combined." "Thank you, sir," I replied softly. He turned toward the window. Is greater than, I'm not a man who regrets much, but I regret what happened to your mother. My heart tightened. My mother? He nodded slowly. Is greater than, you were told she was a maid who died when you were a child. That's not true. The fire crackled. The air thickened. Is greater than, your mother, Eleanor Mercer, was my daughter, my only daughter. I froze. That's not possible. You said, is greater than, I said what I had to protect you. He sighed deeply, the weight of years pressing on his chest. Is greater than Eleanor fell in love with a man named David Rourke, a journalist. A good man, but one who dared to write against our company. Gregory and Ruth despised him. They said he'd ruin our reputation. When Eleanor refused to end it, Gregory had him blacklisted, destroyed his career. He paused, voice cracking. Is greater than, when she became pregnant with you, they called her a disgrace. They forced her out of the estate. She died 2 years later alone, in a small apartment outside the city. You were barely 4. My throat closed. I couldn't speak. He continued, is greater than, I found out too late. When I did, I took you in, changed your records, told the family you were the child of a servant. It was the only way to keep you safe. I stared at him, numb. So Gregory is my uncle. He nodded. Yes, and that's the reason he's always hated you. You remind him of what he did to his sister. The world tilted beneath me. All the years of cruelty, the cold stares, the contempt, it all made sense now. They didn't hate me because I was adopted. They hated me because I was a living reminder of their guilt. Grandfather reached for an envelope on the table. His hands trembled slightly as he slid it toward me. Is greater than, this is my will. I've named you the primary heir of Mercer Holdings. Everything I've built, I want it to go to you. Grandfather, I is greater than no. Listen. His voice hardened. Is greater than Gregory and the others will come for you when I'm gone. They'll try to destroy your name, but you have to stand firm. You've earned every ounce of what they'll try to take. I swallowed hard. When are you? He smiled faintly. Soon. The word landed like a stone in my chest. Is greater than, promise me, Julian. Don't let them bury you the way they buried her. I promise, I whispered. He nodded, closed his eyes, and leaned back. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last time I saw him alive. 3 weeks later, Alfred Mercer passed away quietly in his sleep. The news broke across headlines within hours. Is greater than Alfred Mercer, industrial titan and philanthropist, dies at 83. The company declared a week of mourning. But inside the Mercer mansion, the air was anything but sorrowful. Gregory wore black, but his eyes gleamed with anticipation. Ruth dabbed at her cheeks with a lace handkerchief, dry as paper. Vivian looked almost relieved. Only Isabella seemed truly broken. When the family gathered for the reading of the will, the tension was electric. The lawyer's voice was steady as he began to read. The estate, the assets, the stocks. Then came the final line. Is greater than I, Alfred James Mercer, hereby leave controlling shares of Mercer Holdings, along with the family estate, to my grandson, Julian David Mercer. The silence that followed was deafening. Ruth gasped. Vivian muttered, this must be a mistake. Conrad slammed his hand on the table. And Gregory, he just stared at me, the veins in his temple pulsing. Is greater than, you think you can steal what's ours, he spat. I didn't steal anything, I said calmly. He made his choice. Gregory stood abruptly. Is greater than, you're no Mercer. You're a bastard born out of scandal and lies. I rose too. I'm your sister's son. That stopped him cold. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Mercer, your father's private letter verifies it. Julian is Eleanor's child. Gregory's face turned pale. Ruth's teacup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Isabella began to cry. Is greater than, he knew. I said quietly, meeting Gregory's eyes. He knew what you did to her. Gregory stepped closer until his breath hit my face. Is greater than, you think this company will ever follow you? You think anyone will call you one of us? I didn't flinch. They already do. That night, as snow drifted against the mansion windows, I stood in grandfather's study, his old chair empty, the fire dim. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, distant and cold. Everything he'd built now belonged to me. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like inheritance wrapped in ghosts. I looked at the portrait above the fireplace, Alfred, proud and regal, and whispered, is greater than, I'll protect it. I'll protect your name and hers. But deep down, I knew Gregory wouldn't rest until he took it all back. And I was right. Because 2 weeks later, the first rumor surfaced, a fabricated scandal linking my name to corporate fraud. Documents forged, emails planted, and somewhere in the shadows, I could almost hear Gregory's voice, calm, venomous. Is greater than, let's see how long you can stay standing, boy. The first blow came quietly. A journalist from the Boston Ledger reached out with questions about company funds, moved through offshore accounts I'd never even heard of. 2 days later, those same records surfaced online. Doctored emails, fake signatures, my name printed across every document. Gregory didn't confront me directly. He didn't need to. He had the board, the press, and the family lawyers doing his work. By the end of the week, my access to Mercer Holdings was suspended pending investigation. My phone buzzed non-stop, with messages, half of them from reporters, the other half from people I once called friends, asking if the rumors were true. I called Isabella, no answer. Vivian released a statement, calling me a disappointment to the Mercer legacy. Gregory, of course, stood before cameras, his tone heavy with regret. Is greater than, we are deeply saddened by the recent allegations regarding Julian Mercer's misconduct. While he was once a valued part of our family, we must protect the integrity of this company. He didn't even blink when he said it. The same man who'd hated me since childhood now watched me burn and smiled for the world while doing it. Within a month, I lost everything. My accounts frozen, my name blacklisted. Reporters parked outside my apartment. It was as if the entire city had turned its back on me. One evening, I returned home to find an eviction notice pinned to my door. The building manager avoided eye contact when I asked for an explanation. Is greater than, orders came from higher up, he muttered. I can't fight that kind of money. I packed what little I had, left a few clothes, Alfred's watch, and the sealed letter he'd written me before his death. I drove until the city lights faded into darkness and ended up at the same ranch where Alfred used to teach me to ride. The gates were rusted now, the fields overgrown, but it was the only place that still felt like him. Inside the old barn, I built a small fire and opened the letter. Julian, if you're reading this, it means what I feared has come to pass. Gregory will never let go of his guilt, and his hate will always be stronger than his reason. But remember this, true power doesn't come from inheritance. It comes from endurance. Let them strip you of titles and wealth. They cannot take your mind, your will, or the truth. When the time is right, tell the world who you really are and who they truly were. With all my love, Alfred Mercer. I sat there until dawn, the fire dying beside me. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, only clarity. They had taken everything I had ever worked for, but what they couldn't erase was the truth of who I was. Over the next months, I disappeared. No phone, no contact, no trace. While Gregory celebrated his return to leadership, I quietly began to rebuild. I used what I'd learned, my knowledge of the company, its operations, its weaknesses. From a small workspace in Montana, I began working with a journalist Alfred once trusted, the same kind, who valued truth over money. We traced every shell account, every falsified document, Every hidden transaction Gregory had buried for years. And when the time was right, we released it all. Not under my name, but under my mother's. Eleanor Rourke. The story broke on every major outlet in the country. Is greater than Mercer Holdings implicated in decade-long fraud and insider trading scandal. CEO Gregory Mercer, under federal investigation. By the end of the week, Gregory's empire began to collapse. His assets frozen, his name dragged across the same headlines he once controlled. He'd built his kingdom on lies. I just pulled the curtain back. Months later, I stood by Alfred's grave, the grass wet with spring rain. The city behind me shimmered with cold light. Somewhere out there, the Mercers were fighting over the scraps of what used to be their empire. I placed my hand on the marble headstone and whispered, "Is greater than, it's done." A wind swept through the cemetery, cold but clean. I closed my eyes, letting it carry away the last of the bitterness. When I opened them, I wasn't Julian Mercer, the disgraced heir anymore. I was Julian Rourke, my mother's son. And though I walked away with nothing, somehow, for the first time in my life, I felt free. The end of the Mercer dynasty was never written in gold. It was carved in silence, rebuilt in truth, and reclaimed by the one they tried to erase. Julian didn't need their empire. He found something stronger: freedom. They took everything from him. But in the end, they lost everything that mattered. Be honest, if it were you, would you have walked away or burned it all down? Let me know in the comment and subscribe.